He called Keanu Reeves just a movie cowboy. But what happened next left an entire arena breathless. Under the blinding lights of Las Vegas, two legends stood face to face, one fueled by ego, the other by quiet mastery. But when pride stepped onto the mat, only one man walked away unchanged, and it wasn't who anyone expected. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The air inside the Las Vegas Grand Arena trembled with energy. From the concrete foundation to the rafters laced with lights, everything buzzed with anticipation. It wasn't just another martial arts event. This was the Legacy Invitational, a once-in-a-generation gathering of legendary fighters, film icons, and combat pioneers who had shaped the martial arts world from dojo to silver screen. Crowds had lined up for hours, wrapping around the block, some clutching vintage movie posters, others wearing G's and tournament shirts from decades past. Inside, more than 20,000 fans packed the seats, shoulder to shoulder, faces lit by the flash of cameras and the pulsing LED beams that danced across the ceiling like streaks of lightning. Voices blurred together in a constant roar of excitement, a cocktail of admiration, nostalgia, and the unmistakable scent of something unpredictable. The center mat, polished and spotlighted, gleamed like a stage prepared for more than just demonstrations. It was a battlefield of legacies. All around the perimeter, VIP seating glistened with the presence of martial arts royalty. There were whispers of who might appear, rumors of reunions, surprise appearances, and long-standing feuds possibly brought to light. But it wasn't just the event itself that raised the stakes. Something deeper simmered beneath the surface, a tension you couldn't see, but you could feel, like a storm building behind the stillness. From the far side of the arena, near the judges' table, one man sat motionless, cloaked in deliberate calm. Steven Seagal. Dressed in a crisp black silk robe, with a mandarin collar and subtle golden embroidery, he looked every bit the martial arts icon he had spent decades portraying. His signature ponytail, now streaked with silver, rested neatly down his back. Behind dark-tinted glasses, his face was unreadable, a mask of composure carved from decades of self-mythology. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The cameras found him easily. As the big screens above the ring zoomed in, a murmur swept through the crowd. Part recognition, part reverence, and perhaps a hint of apprehension. Seagal offered only a slight nod. No wave, no smile, no acknowledgement of the rising chatter. He sat with his hands folded loosely over his lap, one foot planted firmly, the other casually resting over his knee. Still as stone. To the untrained eye, he looked relaxed, but those who had studied him, who had watched his movies and absorbed his martial arts philosophy, could sense the rigidity behind his calm. He wasn't just observing, he was measuring, calculating, positioning himself in the space with the quiet authority of someone who believed he belonged above it all. The announcer's voice thundered through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Legacy Invitational, where history meets honor. The crowd erupted into cheers. Spotlights swept across the arena, stopping to highlight select icons seated in the VIP rows. Names were called out one by one. Some stood and bowed, others waved to the cheering masses. Each mention drew its own wave of applause. Then came a pause. A name hadn't been announced yet, but already pockets of the audience began to cheer preemptively. Keanu Reeves. He hadn't arrived. Not yet. And still, he was already being felt. The chant started in waves, echoing from one corner of the arena to the next. At first, it was just a few excited fans shouting his name, but soon it caught on, multiplying into a thunderous rhythm that vibrated through the bleachers. Keanu, Keanu, Keanu. The announcer hadn't said a word about his arrival. No cameras had shown him walking in. But the moment his name was whispered into the air, It lit a fuse. Because Keanu Reeves wasn't just a star to this audience, he was something else entirely. He represented balance. He represented humility in a world of ego, quiet intensity in an arena full of bravado. He wasn't known for taking the stage with flash. He didn't dominate conversations with arrogance. He didn't need to. His presence, when it arrived, always said enough. Back near the ring, Seagal remained unmoved. Though the crowd erupted with applause for fighters from Brazil, Japan, Korea, and the United States, the moment Keanu's name was uttered, even in passing, it triggered a bigger reaction than all the others combined. That didn't go unnoticed. Seagal shifted slightly, just a subtle adjustment of his left hand, curling his fingers along the armrest of his chair. His other hand gently tapped against the edge of his sunglasses. It was small, almost imperceptible, but to anyone watching closely, it was the first crack in his perfect stillness. High above the arena, in a glass-paneled control booth, a team of producers watched the live feed flicker across a dozen screens. One of them leaned forward, eyebrow raised. "We didn't even cue the Keanu package yet," he said. Another producer nodded. "Doesn't matter, the crowd's already ahead of us." A third chimed in. "Should we bump his introduction earlier?" The lead director shook her head. "No, let it simmer. The tension's writing itself." Back down on the floor, spotlights dimmed as a trio of younger fighters stepped onto the mat for the opening kata demonstration. They bowed in unison and began a synchronized flow of strikes, kicks, and acrobatic transitions. The announcer filled in the history of the form, speaking with reverence. But despite their impressive movements, eyes kept darting toward the VIP entrance tunnel. Phones were raised, hoping to catch a glimpse. The crowd was watching the stage, but they were waiting for something else. In the fourth row, a young fighter named Dante Park nudged his friend, pointing toward the corridor behind the security barricade. "It was here," he whispered. Sure enough, there was a flicker of movement in the shadows. A security guard's headset, a camera crew repositioning, a figure stepping just out of view. The announcer hadn't introduced him. The crowd hadn't seen him. But still, they knew. Down the corridor, just beyond the haze of stage lights, Keanu Reeves walked with quiet purpose. No entourage, no music, no fanfare. Just a black button-down shirt, dark jeans, and worn boots that echoed softly against the concrete floor. He moved with the grace of someone who didn't need to announce his arrival, only to arrive. A young staff member tried to intercept him with a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Reeves, do you want to be introduced before the—" Keanu offered a small shake of his head. "I'm here to watch," he said, his voice calm, "not perform." The staffer blinked, nodded, and stepped aside. As Keanu neared the arena entrance, a nearby security guard leaned over and whispered to a colleague. The words spread fast, phones lit up, heads turned. Somewhere in the upper sections, a woman stood and shouted his name. The energy shifted instantly. He entered the arena through the VIP access tunnel. No spotlight followed him, and yet the audience found him anyway. Like gravity pulling every gaze his way. Row by row, cheers began to build again. Seagal, still seated, stared straight ahead. He didn't turn, didn't blink, but his jaw shifted, ever so slightly. The cameras didn't need to find Keanu. The crowd had already done it for them. As Keanu moved along the outer edge of the arena, he paused every few steps to shake hands, sign a program, or offer a nod to a young martial artist in uniform. Each gesture was subtle but personal. Each moment pulled the crowd in tighter. When he reached his seat, 3 sections away from Seagal but still in clear line of sight, he offered a wave to the crowd and sat down, folding his hands gently in his lap. The announcer cleared his throat, clearly adjusting on the fly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice booming again, "I believe someone very special just joined us tonight. Actor, martial artist, philanthropist, The man who reminded the world that discipline can be quiet, but never weak. Keanu Reeves. The crowd erupted. There were no chants now, just a wall of applause rising like thunder in waves. Keanu smiled, nodded modestly, and looked straight ahead. But across the arena, Steven Seagal didn't applaud. He didn't look over. He didn't acknowledge the man who had just entered the space, not with a word, a nod, or a glance. But in that silence, in that deliberate stillness, the challenge had already begun. Backstage, the walls of the media corridor pulsed with the same energy that filled the arena. A line of reporters, camera crews, and production staff moved like clockwork behind the scenes. In the middle of it all stood Maya Lin, barely 25 and still new to the game. Her press badge for Martial Arts Weekly bounced nervously against her blouse as she double-checked her recorder for the third time. She had rehearsed her questions, she had practiced her posture in the mirror, but standing only a few feet from the private green room where Steven Seagal waited, her nerves began to churn. 5 minutes. That's what she had been promised. A 5-minute pre-show interview with the master himself. She glanced at her producer. He gave her a tight nod and mouthed the words, "Stay respectful." The door opened, and there he was. Steven Seagal stepped into the hallway wearing his signature black silk jacket, embroidered subtly across the sleeves. His dark glasses reflected the overhead lights, hiding his expression. His gait was slow, deliberate. Behind him trailed a quiet assistant holding a water bottle and a folded towel. Maya stepped forward with her microphone. "Mr. Seagal, thank you for speaking with us tonight." He offered no handshake, only a slight nod. "Let's make it quick." Her smile was professional, even as her pulse climbed. Tonight's event has brought together some of the biggest names in martial arts history. What does it mean to you to be part of a celebration of legends? Seagal adjusted his glasses. "I've been training for over 40 years. I've studied in Japan. I've trained law enforcement, military. This event is fine for fans, but I don't get caught up in hype." Maya blinked but nodded. "Of course. Many legends are here tonight, including Keanu Reeves, who's being honored later for his influence in cinema and martial arts. Do you have any thoughts on his contribution to the field?" A pause. A long one. Then Seagal chuckled under his breath. "Keanu Reeves?" He tilted his head as if trying to decide whether the question was a joke. "He's a movie star. I'm a martial artist." Maya kept her expression neutral. "Some would say he's trained seriously in jiu-jitsu and other disciplines for his films." Seagal's voice dropped lower. "Trained with choreographers, with wires, with people who are paid to make him look good. I don't do ballet fighting, I do real combat. There's a difference." A silence followed the statement. The cameraman raised his eyebrows but kept rolling. Maya pressed, just slightly. "So, would you say there's a professional respect between the two of you?" He waved a hand dismissively. "Look, I don't know him personally. I'm sure he's a nice guy. But I studied with masters when Keanu was doing air kicks on a green screen. We're not in the same category." The cameraman subtly panned closer as Seagal finished speaking, his tone cool and unbothered. But Maya could feel the tension in the air, thick and brittle. It was the kind of moment she'd been trained to recognize, a quote that would ripple far beyond this hallway, the kind that traveled faster than fists. "Thank you, Mr. Seagal," she said carefully. "We appreciate your time." He gave a half nod and turned without another word, his assistant trailing behind. They disappeared around the corner just as another wave of stage techs came through with equipment carts. Maya stood still for a second, adrenaline buzzing through her limbs. She looked at the cameraman. "Did you get all of that?" "Every word," he replied, already uploading the footage onto his tablet. "That's not going to sit quietly." She nodded slowly. "We need to get it up now, before the main event starts." The two of them moved quickly down the hallway, weaving through production traffic. Back at the press table, Maya grabbed her laptop and began typing the headline. "Think along and think hard." Seagal on Reeves. He's a movie star, I'm a martial artist. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She added a short introduction, clipped the key 30 seconds of the interview, and hit upload. Within minutes, the clip was live, and 10 minutes later, it was viral. Phones began buzzing throughout the arena. Notifications lit up screens as fans opened social media apps. Comments poured in by the hundreds, then thousands. Some were shocked, others were amused, many were furious. The footage was clear, the quote unmistakable, the delivery was smug, the dismissiveness unmistakable. At first, whispers rolled across the seating sections like a breeze. Then came the reaction. Audience members turned to each other with raised eyebrows. Heads shook. Phones were passed around. Within 20 minutes, the announcer's voice returned to the speakers in an attempt to pull focus back to the demonstrations. "Let's hear it for our kata team," he called out. "Now entering the mat are 3 more black belt champions ready to showcase traditional Okinawan karate." But even as the next performers bowed, the arena was no longer united in attention. His eyes kept darting toward the VIP section, where Steven Seagal still sat in his unshakable posture. And others kept turning toward Keanu's seat, where he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, calmly watching the demonstrations, unmoved by the growing storm around him. He hadn't reacted, not once, but the crowd had, and their silence had started to shift. The announcer continued his best effort to steer attention back to the event, but the atmosphere had changed. The sharp edge of celebration had dulled, replaced with something unspoken, something unsettled. In the upper levels of the arena, fans debated loudly between matches. I used to like Seagal," one man said, shaking his head. "But that came off arrogant, didn't it?" His friend nodded. "Keanu never talks like that. He trains hard. You can see it in every role he does. Guy lives on the mat." In the press box, Maya refreshed the video stats. The clip had crossed 800,000 views in under an hour. The quote was already trending. Her inbox was full of notifications from news sites requesting permission to use the footage. She stared at the screen, slightly stunned by the speed of it all. Her cameraman leaned over. "You think Keanu saw it?" Maya didn't answer right away. She glanced down toward the arena floor, where Keanu still sat quietly, eyes focused on the demonstration in front of him. "No," she said softly. "I think he felt it." Down on the mat, a young fighter missed a step in his demonstration. He stumbled slightly, catching himself just in time to avoid a fall. A smattering of applause came from the crowd, but many were distracted, eyes still bouncing between the two legends seated apart. Seagal didn't flinch. His face remained unreadable, but his grip on the chair had changed. Fingers tight, posture straighter. Meanwhile, Keanu offered the young fighter a small nod of encouragement from across the arena. The kid didn't see it, but someone behind him did, and a quiet chain reaction began. Small acts of respect returning to the space. A teenage girl nearby whispered to her mother, "He's not even trying to clap back. That's kind of cool." The announcer cleared his throat again. "We'll be taking a brief intermission before the senior showcase. But don't go anywhere. Some very special guests will be joining us on the mat later this evening." The lights dimmed slightly. The crowd murmured. And for the first time all night, Keanu slowly stood. He walked toward the edge of the mat, not to perform, not to make a statement, but simply to speak with an elderly instructor who had just finished a traditional bow staff routine. They bowed to each other, exchanged a quiet word, and smiled. He returned to his seat without a single glance toward Seagal. But the silence between them now had weight. The crowd felt it, and the night had officially changed. The corridor behind the main stage was dimly lit, filled with the muffled echoes of the cheering crowd, the shuffle of crew boots, and the soft static of radios clipped to security belts. Amidst all the activity, a figure moved with quiet ease, unrushed, unnoticed at first. Keanu Reeves. No camera crew followed him, no spotlight searched for him. He walked alone, dressed in a dark button-down shirt, jeans, and worn boots, his hair tied loosely at the back, his shoulders relaxed. A black baseball cap sat low over his brow, almost as if he hoped no one would notice. But of course they did. A young stagehand recognized him first, eyes widening as he nearly dropped a stack of programs. Keanu caught the top one with a quiet smile and handed it back. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. The kid could only nod, stunned. Keanu gave him a soft pat on the arm and continued on. Further down the hallway, a group of fans from a special access tour stood behind a velvet rope, mostly unaware of what was about to happen. A low murmur spread as Keanu approached. A woman in a vintage Speed t-shirt whispered his name in disbelief. Keanu stopped. He walked over to them slowly, raising a hand in greeting. He didn't perform, didn't pose. He connected. He looked each person in the eye, took the time to sign what they held out, and asked them how their night was going. His presence didn't feel like a star passing through. It felt like a friend showing up when no one expected him. One child, no more than 10, held out a toy replica of a samurai sword. "I loved you in that movie," the boy said. "The one with the swords and snow?" Keanu smiled. "You mean 47 Ronin?" The boy nodded. Keanu crouched slightly to meet his eyes. "I loved making that one." "You into samurai stuff?" The boy's eyes lit up. "I want to train in kendo." "You should," Keanu said softly. "It teaches you how to be still and strong at the same time." He handed the toy sword back, then bowed lightly. The fans watched him walk away like they'd just witnessed something sacred. A few feet ahead, a security guard named Aaron stood at the checkpoint, jaw tight. He had watched the viral clip of Seagal's interview a dozen times already. Now the man who had been on the receiving end of those words was walking toward him, quiet, alone, and radiating the exact opposite of everything the clip had projected. Keanu stopped when he reached him. Aaron hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "There's something I think you should see." Keanu took the phone gently from Aaron's hand. The screen showed a paused frame of Steven Seagal mid-interview. The headline was bold, already familiar. "Seagal on Reeves. He's a movie star. I'm a martial artist." Aaron hesitated. "It's everywhere, sir. It hit the floor about 20 minutes ago. The crowd knows." Keanu nodded once, then tapped the play button. He watched in silence. Seagal's voice came through clearly, calm, clipped, laced with a casual superiority that didn't try to hide itself. "Keanu does ballet fighting with wires. I do real combat." Keanu stood motionless, listening to every word. The hallway seemed to fall quieter, like the walls themselves were waiting for his response. When the video ended, Keanu didn't hand the phone back right away. He looked at it for a moment longer, as if weighing something heavier than just the words. Then he exhaled through his nose, subtle and soft. Finally, he spoke. "Everyone's fighting something." Aaron blinked. "Sorry, sir." Keanu handed the phone back, eyes calm. You never really know what someone's carrying, what they've convinced themselves they need to protect. Aaron opened his mouth to say something but found himself unsure of what. Keanu simply gave him a small nod and stepped forward, walking through the security checkpoint without another word. From the edge of the corridor, Maya Lin stood watching, notebook in hand, her press badge still dangling. She had come looking for a new quote, maybe a reaction. But what she saw made her lower her pen. No flash, no anger, no rebuttal. Just stillness. Keanu made his way toward the edge of the arena tunnel. From there, he could hear the announcer warming the crowd for the next demonstration. The cheers were loud, but they held a different weight now. The noise wasn't just excitement, it was tension waiting to be released. A stagehand approached nervously, holding a laminated run-of-show sheet. "Mr. Reeves, do you want to be introduced during the next transition or wait until the feature presentation?" Keanu looked toward the arena. He could hear someone in the audience already chanting his name again. He smiled faintly, almost sadly. "No introduction," he said quietly. "Just let me walk in." The stagehand nodded, unsure how to process that. As Keanu waited at the tunnel entrance, he closed his eyes for a brief moment. The kind of pause that wasn't just to breathe, but to reset, to center himself before walking into a place that had already turned electric. Then he opened his eyes and stepped into the light. He walked in without fanfare, without music, without announcement. But the moment Keanu Reeves appeared at the edge of the arena, the crowd shifted. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. It was as if the energy of 20,000 people had leaned forward at once. He didn't raise his hands or flash a smile for the cameras. He didn't acknowledge the spotlight that found him a second later. Instead, he simply walked, calm and unhurried, down the narrow aisle between sections, past the rows of spectators who now watched him in stunned silence. He paused to shake the hand of an elderly judo master seated in the second row. Then he bent down to speak briefly with a young woman in a wheelchair, wearing a faded Matrix hoodie. She wiped her eyes as he touched her shoulder gently. None of it felt performative. That was what struck people most. Keanu moved through the noise like a steady flame, untouched by the chaos around him. He didn't ignore the cheers, but he didn't feed them either. He accepted their presence without trying to own it. Back near the VIP row, Seagal kept his gaze fixed on the mat. His face remained expressionless, but the tightness in his posture betrayed what his silence refused to say. His right hand gripped the edge of the seat. His jaw was set firm. He didn't look toward Keanu, not once. But the crowd did. As Keanu reached his reserved seat, a roar of applause finally broke through. It came in waves, rising, falling, then rising again. The chants began once more, not orchestrated but organic. "Keanu, Keanu, Keanu." He gave a humble nod and sat down, folding his hands in his lap. From the press box, Maya watched the moment unfold with wide eyes. Her earlier interview with Seagal now felt like a match someone had struck near dry leaves. The fire hadn't started yet, but the air was already warm. Behind her, her cameraman spoke low. "He's not saying anything." And somehow, that's louder than anything Seagal said. On the floor, Keanu leaned slightly forward, watching the demonstration like a student, not a guest of honor. He didn't scan the crowd or the cameras. He focused only on the movement unfolding before him on the mat. He was the center of attention, but he acted like he wasn't, and that made the attention grow. In the stillness of his posture and the ease of his presence, something unspoken crystallized. It was not a show of power. It was the absence of needing one. And in that absence, the tension in the arena became more than anticipation. It became personal. Something had been set in motion. But no one, not even Seagal, realized yet that it had already begun. The arena lights dimmed slightly, signaling a scheduled break between demonstrations. Vendors rushed through the aisles, fans stood to stretch their legs, and technicians moved equipment behind the mat for the next presentation. But even in the downtime, the buzz didn't die. If anything, it intensified. Because Keanu Reeves was now seated near the edge of the mat, and the energy in the room hadn't stopped shifting since he arrived. Every few seconds, another person turned to glance at him. Some raised their phones and took pictures. Others simply watched him in quiet awe. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But he didn't have to. His presence had tilted the balance of the entire night. Up in the control booth, the lead producer gave the announcer a subtle signal through his headset. "It's time. Push the tension," she said. "The crowd's already lit, just fan it." The announcer stepped forward, microphone in hand, and took his place at the center of the mat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice filling every corner of the arena. "What an incredible start to tonight's celebration of martial arts." Cheers erupted. The announcer let the applause settle before continuing. But this isn't just about the action on the mat. Tonight's about the legacy of martial arts itself, the history, the passion, the evolution, and let's be honest. He paused dramatically, turning slowly toward the crowd. We've got living legends in this room. And, if you've been on your phones, we've already had a few spicy words fly around backstage. A collective wave of laughter and gasps rippled through the audience. Phones lit up instantly. "Don't pretend you haven't seen it," the announcer added with a grin. "This is Vegas. Word travels fast." He pointed playfully at the press booth. Our friends over in media were kind enough to catch an interview earlier with the iconic Steven Seagal. And let's just say, he trailed off and smiled. He had some strong opinions about a few of his peers. The crowd buzzed. Some laughed, others shouted Seagal's name. And of course, just a few rows away from me right now, we have another legend in the house. You know him from The Matrix, from John Wick, from his decades of dedication to martial arts, both on and off screen. He gestured toward the VIP row. Mr. Keanu Reeves. The arena exploded. Applause thundered, cheers rose like a wave. Keanu gave a small wave, acknowledging the moment with the same humility he'd carried all night. 3 seats down, Steven Seagal didn't move, but the side of his jaw flexed visibly, just once. Then again, his hands remained folded, but his pride, sharp, silent, and deeply rooted, was starting to stir. The announcer let the cheers linger before speaking again. The noise filled the space with kinetic tension, excitement mixed with something else, a sense that something unscripted might happen tonight. The crowd could feel it. Even those who had just come for fun, families and casual fans, were now leaning in with curious eyes. "And let me be clear," the announcer said, pacing slowly across the mat with a theatrical pause. "This isn't about conflict, it's about celebration. But hey, sometimes when greatness shares a room, sparks fly." That line hit hard. Whistles echoed from the upper seats. Cameras panned back and forth between Keanu and Seagal. Both were seated, both still. But their stillness had opposite effects. Keanu's calm was warm, collected, a quiet acknowledgement that the moment wasn't about ego. His hands rested loosely in his lap, his eyes focused on the mat. Seagal, on the other hand, looked like a statue carved out of concrete, rigid, arms folded, face unreadable. His famous tinted glasses hid whatever flicker might have been there, but his clenched jaw said enough. The announcer smiled to himself as he took the mic a few steps closer to their row. "I mean, we've all seen the movies, we've seen the techniques, we've seen the philosophies behind the moves. But tonight's a little different. Tonight we're witnessing something rare." He pointed toward the audience again. "A moment where 2 schools of legacy meet, where the past, the present, and maybe even the future of martial arts all sit under the same roof." The crowd began to buzz again, excited but unsure of what would come next. "Now, before we move into the next demonstration," the announcer continued, "I'd like to invite all of you to reflect on something." He paused, then said slowly, "What does it really mean to be a master?" A hushed silence fell over the arena. Is it years in the dojo? Is it fight records, belt colors, or... He turned slightly, facing both Keanu and Seagal now. Is it the ability to keep growing even when you're already great? To walk in respect even when you have the power not to? Those lines hit home. Keanu lifted his eyes to meet the announcers for a brief moment, just a glance. Then he nodded once. Subtle, like a bow. In the row behind him, fans began whispering. "He's talking about Keanu. Did you see Seagal's interview? This is getting tense." Keanu didn't even react to it. Down the row, Seagal shifted in his chair. He adjusted his collar with a sharp flick of the wrist, then leaned back. Still silent, still motionless. But the air around him was growing heavier. His ego wasn't used to being matched, let alone overshadowed. And tonight, the crowd was making it clear, Humility was winning. As the announcer returned to center stage, the energy in the arena simmered just below boiling. No one had thrown a punch. No one had even stood up. But somehow the tension in the air felt more intense than a championship bout. The crowd was riveted. Back at ringside, Seagal's fingers tapped against the arm of his chair. Once. Twice. A rhythm born not of calm, but control. He leaned over and whispered something to his assistant, who quickly nodded and disappeared backstage. It wasn't clear what had been said, but whatever it was, it came with a sharpness that stung the air around him. Just then, the announcer lifted his mic again. "Now, folks, it's no secret that some of our legends here tonight come from very different backgrounds," he said, his voice laced with meaning. "We've got traditionalists, we've got film warriors, we've got modern-day tacticians, and every single one of them has earned their place here." He paused dramatically. "But respect, that's not given by titles or trophies or tweets. It's given by character, and sometimes by how we respond when challenged." A collective murmur rolled across the audience like thunder rumbling through the hills. Several cameras quickly cut to Keanu. He was still seated, hands loosely clasped, head gently tilted. No reaction, no smugness, just stillness, anchored, as if he were in the eye of a brewing storm. Seagal, though, began to bristle. His chin jutted forward slightly, his lips pressing into a thin, firm line. His sunglasses remained in place, but there was no mistaking the stiffness in his posture. From the front row, a young fan in a karate uniform stood up and shouted, "We love you, Keanu!" The crowd burst into cheers, almost as if a valve had finally released the tension. Whistles, claps, even a few stomps echoed throughout the arena. Keanu smiled and gave a small wave without standing. A humble acknowledgement, nothing flashy. The cameras picked it up instantly. The live broadcast feed zoomed in just enough to catch the flicker of humility in his eyes. Backstage, producers scrambled to decide how to pivot the next segment. What had started as a peaceful celebration was now crackling with undercurrents of challenge. Social media was ablaze. The Seagal comment had already trended worldwide, and the announcer's speech had thrown gas on an open flame. The announcer, sensing the moment was reaching its peak, offered one final line before the lights dimmed for the next exhibition. "Tonight, the mat is for demonstration," he said, voice low and heavy. "But sometimes the real lessons are learned from silence, from grace, and from knowing when not to throw a punch." And with that, the spotlight faded. But no one in that crowd believed things were over. The silence between Seagal and Keanu now spoke louder than any microphone could. The whole world was watching, and the night was far from finished. The lights dimmed once again as the announcer stepped back into the spotlight, his voice smooth and energized. "Now, folks, we're moving into one of the most anticipated segments of tonight's event," he said, letting the words stretch. "We're honored to witness living legends demonstrate the very disciplines they've helped bring into the spotlight for generations." The crowd hushed with anticipation. "In this corner," the announcer continued, gesturing toward a mat now illuminated by a single spotlight, "we have a man who's not only starred in countless action films, but is also a 7th Dan black belt in Aikido. Please welcome Steven Seagal." Applause rose, respectful but mixed with murmurs. The energy wasn't as electric as before, less thunderous than when Keanu's name was called, but still carried weight. Seagal stood from his chair slowly. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonious. He smoothed the front of his dark Aikido gi, adjusted his sleeves, and walked onto the mat with a quiet confidence that had defined his career for decades. The camera followed him closely, capturing the steely calm in his eyes behind his tinted glasses. An assistant bowed respectfully before joining him on the mat, lean, nimble, and clearly well practiced. The demonstration began with classic Aikido footwork, Seagal shifting his stance as the assistant lunged forward with a controlled strike. With a swirl of movement, Seagal deflected the attack, redirected the energy, and swept the assistant off balance, guiding him gently to the floor without force. It looked effortless. The crowd responded with quiet awe. Seagal transitioned into more complex movements, showcasing traditional wrist locks and throws that emphasized redirection over resistance. Each sequence ended with the assistant immobilized, then respectfully rising for the next round. There was an elegance to it, like watching martial arts painted in calligraphy. But beneath the surface, a subtle tension lingered. Seagal wasn't just demonstrating, he was performing. Every gesture seemed calculated to remind the audience of his legitimacy. At one point, he stepped aside and addressed the audience directly. "You see," he said, microphone clipped to his collar, "true martial arts is about controlling energy, not throwing punches. Anyone can kick. What matters is what you do before the fight starts." There was an undertone to his voice, measured but unmistakable. As the demonstration ended, the announcer returned. "Thank you, Mr. Seagal, for that beautiful display of traditional Aikido," he said warmly. "A master of movement, balance, and control." Seagal nodded slightly and returned to his seat, his face unreadable. The announcer paused for dramatic effect. "But I think I speak for everyone when I say, we're not done yet." The crowd perked up instantly. "We've got another martial artist here tonight," he continued. "Someone you all know and love. And though he didn't come here to step onto the mat tonight, I wonder if he'd consider it." He turned toward Keanu. The audience began to stir. Then, almost like a wave, a chant began. "Keanu! Keanu! Keanu!" The chant grew louder, echoing through the arena like a rising tide. Keanu sat quietly near the edge of the stage, his head slightly lowered, lips curled in a half-smile. He glanced at the announcer, then at the crowd, then back at the mat, still warm from Seagal's demonstration. He leaned toward the announcer's table and spoke calmly into a nearby microphone. "I wasn't planning on anything tonight," he said, his voice soft but steady. "But if it's all right, I'd like to show something simple. Not a show, just movement."
Oh.
The crowd erupted into cheers. Keanu stood, removed his jacket, and walked slowly toward the mat. He wore a black, fitted t-shirt and training pants beneath, no flash or pomp, just like him. There was no entourage, no spotlight request, no dramatic entrance. Just calm, measured steps and a humble presence that somehow amplified the room's energy without trying. A young man stood at the side of the mat, already probably in his early 20s, dressed in a white gi and black belt. He looked nervous but focused. Keanu turned to him with a quiet nod. "You mind working with me?" The young man bowed, visibly honored. Keanu bowed in return. Then, as they stepped onto the mat together, something shifted. Not in sound or light, but in feeling. The crowd leaned in. Phones were raised, but no one was shouting. It wasn't fanfare now. It was reverence. The two began with a basic jiu-jitsu flow drill, moving slowly, with control. Keanu took the guard position and demonstrated a smooth hip escape, then transitioned to a sweep, never forcing the motion, always showing the clean mechanics behind each move. He wasn't there to impress, he was there to honor the art. He moved to side control, then to mount, then reset. The young man mirrored him, clearly trained but now visibly awed by Keanu's control and timing. It wasn't flashy, no high kicks, no backflips, no big takedowns, but it was pure. They moved again, this time with Keanu in the bottom position. He demonstrated a triangle setup, then bailed out mid-flow to show how a mistake could turn into a sweep. He paused briefly, adjusting his partner's posture with gentle guidance. The camera caught everything, not just the movement, but Keanu's patience, his calm demeanor, the respect he gave his partner. He wasn't performing, he was teaching. After about 4 minutes of quiet, fluid movement, Keanu stood and gave a humble nod to the audience. They responded instantly, rising to their feet. The ovation wasn't loud like a rock concert. It was full of something else: respect, gratitude, stillness, even in applause. Keanu helped his partner to his feet and raised his hand in recognition, deflecting any praise onto the young man beside him. Then he walked back toward his seat, expression unchanged. Steven Seagal, watching from the front row, did not clap. His face was frozen, tense. His eyes followed Keanu all the way back to his seat. As Keanu reached the edge of the mat, he quietly retrieved his jacket and slipped it back on, nodding politely to the stage assistant. There was no triumphant smile, no basking in the spotlight. He simply sat down again, legs crossed, watching the next event unfold as if nothing unusual had happened. But the energy in the room had changed completely. People weren't just cheering anymore. They were whispering, leaning into each other, trying to find words for what they'd just seen. Not because it was technically groundbreaking, but because it was honest, grounded, gentle, powerful in its restraint, and maybe that's what unsettled some people more than any fancy move ever could. On social media, clips of the moment were already exploding. Within minutes, Keanu's soft-footed transitions and humble interaction with the young black belt were being called the most respectful 4 minutes in martial arts television. Headlines appeared instantly. Keanu teaches jiu-jitsu the way it was meant to be. Silence on the mat, thunder online. Reeves moves with more grace than 100 choreographers. Meanwhile, at ringside, Steven Seagal was clearly feeling the shift. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, sunglasses still on. But his jaw was clenched, the kind of clench that didn't come from losing a spotlight, but from realizing that someone else had never wanted it and yet had taken it anyway, without effort. A nearby camera caught Seagal muttering under his breath. It wasn't audible, but the look in his eyes said enough. The pride that had once filled the room when he took the stage now felt oddly fragile. Backstage, the announcer leaned over to a producer and whispered, "We might need to add a few security folks near Seagal. This energy, it's combustible." There wasn't hostility in the air, but there was a crackling tension, like something had shifted irreversibly. And now the whole room was waiting to see what would happen next. The announcer took the mic again, attempting to lighten the tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but I think that was the quietest standing ovation I've ever seen. That's what happens when presence speaks louder than punches." The crowd responded with soft laughter and scattered applause. Then came the real surprise. The young assistant who had worked with Keanu walked over to Seagal's section and bowed respectfully. A kind gesture. But Seagal didn't acknowledge it. He stared straight ahead, unmoved. It didn't go unnoticed. The camera didn't catch the bow, but the audience did, and murmurs began spreading through the crowd. A contrast had been drawn, not just in fighting styles, but in character. And it wasn't over. The announcer glanced at the next name on the roster for the upcoming Spotlight demo. His voice crackled through the speakers. Coming up next, a surprise pairing. Let's just say you might want to keep your phones out. Gasps rippled through the arena. Everyone leaned forward, because something big was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. The lights shifted again, this time dimming just slightly as a new kind of tension settled over the arena. This wasn't about technique anymore. It wasn't about kicks or throws or transitions. It was about something deeper. The MC returned to the center, this time with a different tone in his voice. "Tonight isn't just about movement," he said. "It's about meaning." So, for the next few minutes, we're handing the mic to two men who've each shaped the world of martial arts in their own way. Let's hear from the legends themselves. Steven Seagal stepped up first. He moved with purpose, almost theatrical in the way he approached center mat. He didn't bow. He didn't glance toward the crowd. He just began to speak, his voice deep and sharp. "Aikido," Seagal said, "is the art of control through redirection. It's about flowing with your opponent, not resisting them. You use their energy against them, turn it, trap it, subdue it." He demonstrated with his assistant, pulling him forward and spinning him with a calculated toss. The audience responded with polite applause. Seagal straightened his jacket and continued. "The key," he said, "is never letting your emotions take over. You stay in control. You dominate the space." He glanced toward Keanu without turning his body, as if acknowledging the silent competitor behind him without naming him directly. "That's what separates martial artists from actors," he added. "We don't perform. We apply truth." The words hung in the air. Then Keanu stood up from his place on the edge of the mat. He didn't rush. He didn't stride. He simply walked forward, hands in front of him, breathing slowly, deliberately. When the announcer offered him a mic, Keanu gently waved it off. He didn't need one. The arena went quiet. "Discipline," Keanu began, his voice soft, steady, and intimate, "is choosing peace. When you have the power to destroy." There was a pause. A few people exhaled slowly. He looked toward the crowd, not with a challenge, but with something else, an invitation. "I've been taught by people who could end a fight in seconds," he continued. "But the ones I learned the most from were the ones who never needed to." He smiled gently. "Maybe we're calm, focused, and kind." Then he turned slightly toward Seagal, who was watching from a few feet away, arms crossed. "I respect anyone who's walked the path," Keanu said. "Aikido, karate, judo, boxing, jiu-jitsu, we all carry something." Another pause. "But for me, jiu-jitsu is more than grappling. It's a reflection of life. Sometimes the ground is where real life takes you. And knowing how to survive down there, how to stay calm and not panic, how to breathe," he tapped his chest once, "that's the difference between fear and peace." Hush spread across the arena like a warm wind. No one clapped yet. They were still absorbing. Seagal's expression tightened. He offered a short, measured nod, but the corner of his mouth twitched. For a man used to commanding attention through strength and presence, watching Keanu win over the crowd with humility seemed to strike a nerve. The MC, sensing the growing contrast, stepped back in with a chuckle that tried to break the tension. "Two legends, two philosophies. I don't know about you folks, but I think we're witnessing something more than just martial arts tonight." The crowd responded this time. Soft claps first, then cheers growing from the back rows. But again, the louder applause leaned toward Keanu, whose grounded posture and sincere tone had quietly pulled everyone in. One of the moderators handed Seagal the mic again. He cleared his throat and raised it slowly, his eyes fixed forward. "Jiu-jitsu," he said flatly, "is wrestling, rolling around on the ground. It works in sport, maybe in cages, but it's not combat. Not real street combat. Real life doesn't give you a mat." There was a low murmur in the crowd. "But go ahead," he added. "Call it philosophy if that helps you sleep at night." A few awkward chuckles came from the front row. Some of Seagal's longtime fans tried to laugh along, but it didn't spread. The energy shifted again, this time not to tension, but discomfort. Keanu looked over without changing his expression. He gave a small shrug, then said simply, "Sometimes the ground is where people fall. Life knocks you down, not just in fights, but in everything. If you can't find balance there, if you panic or pretend you're too good to be on the ground, you break." That hit differently. The audience went silent again, but not from confusion. It was the kind of silence that comes from shared experience, people remembering the last time life knocked them flat. Then Keanu added, "That's why I train. Not to win, not to dominate, but to stay kind when things go wrong." No one moved for a moment. Then someone in the back clapped once. Then again. Then a wave of applause moved forward like a tide. Not a standing ovation, not wild cheers, but something deeper. Respect. Even the MC stood there quietly, hand over his chest, nodding slightly. Back on the side of the mat, Keanu gave a small bow and stepped back into the shadows. He wasn't performing, he was just being present. And the contrast with Seagal couldn't have been clearer. Seagal took a deep breath, his jaw flexing as he tried to reclaim the moment. He stepped forward again, lifting the mic as if to deliver a final blow, but his words came out measured, slower than before. "You know," he began, "martial arts is about control, about never letting your opponent dictate your movements. You lead, you command. You don't just survive, you dominate." His voice carried, but the tone felt forced now. He looked around the crowd, as if searching for nods of agreement. A few came, scattered and polite, but most eyes had drifted back to Keanu, who stood quietly by the edge of the mat, hands folded, posture relaxed. Seagal continued, "There's nothing noble about letting yourself be dragged down. That's weakness dressed up as virtue." Keanu didn't flinch. He simply raised his head slightly, eyes calm. Then, with the softest voice that somehow reached every corner of the arena, he responded, "I used to think strength meant not falling, but now I believe it's how you stand back up." It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but the impact landed like a punch to the chest. For a moment, even the lights felt dimmer, as if the arena itself had paused. A woman in the front row wiped a tear from her cheek. From the sidelines, the young black belt who had assisted Keanu stepped forward, holding out a towel. Keanu nodded his thanks, dabbing the sweat from his brow. Then he passed the towel back and gave the young man a quiet pat on the shoulder. The gesture was small, but it was the kind of thing that made people believe again, not just in martial arts, but in dignity. The MC finally spoke, his voice lighter now. "Well, we said we'd see two legends tonight, and I think we just saw two worlds collide." The audience gave a warm, rising applause. It wasn't about who was better. It was about what each man revealed when the spotlight hit them. Seagal stood stiffly, staring straight ahead. The applause wasn't for him, not this time. Backstage, the crew exchanged glances. A camera operator whispered, "Did we just witness something shift?" The viral moment wasn't about technique anymore. It was about truth. And the truth was clear. One man came to prove he was still powerful. The other came with nothing to prove at all. And in the end, only one of them had the room listening, without ever needing to raise his voice. The spotlight dimmed for a moment as the mats were cleared. Background music returned, just enough to signal a pause before the next segment. Spectators leaned back in their seats, whispering, scrolling through their phones, or discussing the emotional weight of what had just taken place between the two legends. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, Steven Seagal stepped forward once again, his expression neutral, but his eyes gleaming with something unspoken. He took the microphone slowly, clearing his throat as the arena quieted in expectation. "With all the love in the air tonight," he said, a smirk touching the corners of his lips, "maybe we can offer the audience a little more than just talk." A ripple of curiosity stirred through the crowd. Seagal turned his head, looking directly at Keanu, who was speaking quietly with a young jiu-jitsu competitor on the edge of the mat. Keanu looked up. Their eyes met. "Keanu," Seagal continued, keeping his tone even, "why don't we give the people a brief exchange? Not a fight, nothing aggressive, just a demonstration. My art, your art. A friendly contrast." The crowd murmured. It wasn't quite a challenge, but it wasn't entirely innocent either. Keanu walked slowly to the mic, taking it with a gentle nod. He looked down for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "If it's about honoring the disciplines," Keanu said, "I'll always be open to learning and sharing." He paused again. The arena leaned in. "But only if respect stays on the mat," he added. "That's the only rule I care about." The audience broke into applause. It wasn't thunderous. It was thoughtful. The kind of applause people give when they recognize a man who means what he says. Seagal nodded, hiding a flicker of irritation behind a composed smile. He stepped back, arms crossed, waiting for the announcer. The MC grabbed the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with rising excitement, "after tonight's scheduled bouts, we're going to have something very rare. A freestyle martial arts exchange between two icons of two very different philosophies." The crowd's energy shifted instantly. Phones lit up, social media feeds exploded, hashtags began to populate. Keanu vs. Seagal, martial arts legends, respect on the mat. In the crowd, children with their parents began talking about what jiu-jitsu was. Others debated aikido, and some, clearly longtime fans of either man, just sat in silent anticipation. Backstage, camera crews rearranged schedules to stay longer, commentators whispered through earpieces, interviewers rewrote questions, and up in the higher rows, a group of high school martial arts students passed their soda cups back and forth, eyes wide with excitement. The night had just been reframed. It was no longer just about individual demos. It was no longer about pride. Something deeper had emerged. Two paths, two ways of life, and the possibility that they could coexist on the same floor, under the same lights, with nothing but silence and movement to tell their truths. The announcer's words echoed across the stadium, and the reaction spread like wildfire. Keanu turned slightly, giving a modest smile as a camera zoomed in. He didn't wave or posture. He simply placed the microphone back in the announcer's hand, gave a nod of acknowledgement, and stepped off the mat. Steven Seagal remained in place for a few moments longer, accepting a round of applause with a slight bow. But as he turned to walk off the stage, his gait was just a touch stiffer. There was no mistaking the subtle tension beginning to form in his shoulders. It wasn't just the crowd's favor that had shifted, it was the nature of the evening. Backstage, Keanu sat near a corner where some folding chairs were arranged. He sipped water from a paper cup, speaking softly with a young jiu-jitsu assistant who had warmed up with him earlier. Their conversation was light, but focused. You could tell by the way Keanu leaned in, listening intently, occasionally placing a hand on the kid's shoulder with encouragement. Across the room, Seagal was having a very different conversation. His assistants, dressed in crisp uniforms, were reviewing movements, miming sequences, and speaking in hushed but rapid Japanese and English. One of them leaned in close to Seagal's ear, muttering something that made him narrow his eyes. In the middle of the chaos, an older camera operator named Dean paused to whisper to a younger grip beside him. "You ever seen something like this before?" The grip shook his head. "No egos in the cage," Dean said, "but egos on the mat? That's where real tension lives." The crowd continued buzzing. Journalists began to speculate online about what form the freestyle exchange might take. Would it be light sparring, technique comparison, a philosophical debate in motion? Meanwhile, back in the arena, event staff rolled out a fresh black mat, spotless and larger than the individual ones used in the earlier demonstrations. Spotlights slowly adjusted. The main card was still happening in the ring, but the audience's minds were clearly divided. All eyes were on the mat that wasn't yet being used. As the main fight of the evening reached its climax, a rapid-fire striking match between two young champions, the audience gave polite applause, but their focus kept drifting. Everyone was waiting for the moment after. The moment when Keanu Reeves and Steven Seagal would step onto the same space at the same time. Two worlds, both built on discipline. One on elegance and redirection, the other on grounded presence and control. One born from cinematic mystique, the other from quiet, personal practice. In the green room, Keanu finally stood. His assistant offered him a fresh gi top, but he shook his head, opting to stay in his plain black shirt and soft grappling pants. There was no need for formality. What he was about to do wasn't a performance, it was a conversation, without words. As the lights dimmed slightly and the announcer stepped forward with renewed energy, the atmosphere turned electric. His voice boomed with excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to witness is not a fight. It's not a competition. It's a respectful exchange between two philosophies, two legends, two ways of life. He extended a hand toward one side of the mat. Please welcome back Mr. Steven Seagal. Seagal walked out slowly, his black gi flowing behind him like a robe. His face was unreadable, but the sharp flick of his eyes toward the crowd made one thing clear. He knew exactly what was at stake. Applause followed him, respectful but not roaring. Then the announcer turned to the other side, and joining him, Keanu Reeves. The cheer that followed was nearly deafening. Not because of celebrity, but because of something else, something unspoken. The audience felt they were witnessing more than a showcase. They were witnessing a moment that wasn't supposed to happen. Humility meeting pride, presence meeting performance. Keanu stepped onto the mat barefoot, no flashy gestures, no cinematic poses, just a nod toward Seagal. Then he bowed. Not too deep, just enough to say, "I'm here, I respect you. Let's make this honest." Seagal bowed in return, his expression neutral. They approached the center of the mat and stood a few feet apart. The announcer's voice softened now, reverent. No rules, no winners, just flow. Then he stepped away. Keanu raised his hands, palms open, relaxed. His stance was low, rooted, as if he were more connected to the floor than the air around him. Seagal lifted a hand and began with a fluid, circular movement, inviting contact. Keanu didn't resist. He met the motion, redirected it. The flow began. It wasn't violent, it wasn't fast, but it was captivating. Seagal used traditional Aikido footwork, light and circular, attempting to unbalance through angles. Keanu moved with a grounded rhythm, rolling through contact, responding rather than attacking. Every time Seagal tried to guide him into a throw, Keanu's body softened and spiraled out, rebalancing. When Keanu applied subtle pressure, an underhook, a shoulder drag, it never escalated. It redirected. It whispered instead of shouting. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. And the crowd, once rowdy, now sat silent. Thousands of people, leaning in, breathing as one. Then Seagal attempted a high wrist lock. Keanu let him get it, but instead of resisting, he sank his weight into it, rolled over his shoulder, and emerged standing on the other side, unharmed, smiling gently. Seagal blinked. Keanu gave a soft nod. A new kind of silence filled the room. Not tension, reverence. The announcer didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Two philosophies had met on the mat. Only one walked off lighter, still grounded, still kind, and still holding the respect of a crowd that had seen enough movies to know when something real finally showed up. Maya adjusted her press badge as she stepped into the quieter hallway behind the arena. The air backstage felt heavier than the crowd's energy outside. It wasn't just anticipation. It was something more personal, something unsettled. She spotted Dante Park leaning against a pillar near the locker room doors. The young fighter was dressed in a crisp tracksuit, his hands wrapped loosely with gauze. He was supposed to be relaxing before his undercard match, but his eyes told a different story. Maya approached with a soft smile. "Couldn't sit still either?" Dante shook his head, his arms folded tight across his chest. "Nope. Not after what just happened out there." "You mean the flow exchange?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Yeah," he said, eyes still locked on the wall. "I grew up watching Seagal's films. I even took Aikido because of him. I thought he was untouchable, larger than life. And now?" Maya's voice lowered, sensing something deeper. Dante hesitated. "Now I'm not so sure. The way Keanu moved, it wasn't just technique, it was humble, honest. He didn't try to dominate, he just responded." Maya nodded. "Presence instead of performance." "Exactly," Dante said, his voice tightening. "But Seagal, he looked like he was forcing it, like he was trying to prove something instead of share something. Maya tilted her head. That's a hard thing to unsee when someone you've looked up to starts revealing cracks. Dante finally looked at her. It's like realizing your hero's been wearing a costume. She didn't respond right away. The hum of distant crowd noise filled the gap between their thoughts. Then she asked, "Do you think this exchange between them, Keanu and Seagal, was just polite choreography? Or do you think something real slipped through?" Dante's expression softened. It felt real to me. But not for the reason I expected. Keanu wasn't showing off. He was showing up. There's a difference. Maya glanced down the hallway where Seagal's private dressing area was. You think Seagal saw it that way? Dante shrugged. I think he felt something shift, whether he admits it or not. Before she could respond, the hallway lights flickered slightly. It was nothing, just an electrical hum. But it made the silence feel sharper. A young production assistant passed by, whispering into a headset. Mr. Seagal's asking for another 10 minutes before press enters. Maya raised a brow. 10 minutes? For what? The assistant hesitated. He's pacing, said he needed space. They both turned slightly, glancing toward the closed door where Seagal's name was taped in bold letters. No noise came from inside. Just that heavy, waiting silence. Behind that door, Steven Seagal walked in slow, repetitive circles. His hands moved in small, habitual Aikido gestures, wrist rolls, elbow redirects. But there was no opponent, just air. His brow was furrowed. Not with anger, with confusion. He had expected the crowd to erupt when he stepped onto the mat. He had expected Keanu to be clumsy, or slow, or maybe a little theatrical. But what he got was something that didn't fit in any box he knew. Something calm, something rooted, something that made his own movement feel hollow by comparison. His pride, once rock solid, now echoed with tiny fractures. He paused at the edge of the mirror, staring into his own reflection.
He didn't see the man from the movies. He saw a man being measured by the present and found wanting. The knock on Seagal's door was soft at first. 5 minutes, sir, said a crew member through the crack. Seagal didn't answer right away. He was adjusting the cuffs of his gi, but his mind wasn't on fabric or fit. It was on Keanu's face. Calm, still, unbothered. Not smug, not insecure, just present. The same kind of presence Seagal remembered from his old masters, long before the spotlight found him. That quiet dignity that couldn't be performed, it had to be earned. And somewhere along the way, years, maybe decades ago, he had stopped earning it. He muttered to himself, "It's just a demo, that's all this is." But even he didn't believe it. Across the backstage corridor, Maya was still scribbling in her notebook, observing every detail. Dante sat beside her now, elbows on knees, bouncing one leg restlessly. You think he'll actually go through with it? Dante asked. He has to, Maya said. Backing out now would look worse than any move he fumbled. But if he does go through with it, Dante said slowly, what's he really trying to prove? Maya closed her notebook. That's the question, isn't it? Is he trying to prove he still matters? Or trying to silence what Keanu just reminded everyone? They sat in silence, watching shadows move under Seagal's door. The ripple of uncertainty had begun to spread. Back in the arena, the main match had wrapped, and the announcer's voice boomed again through the loudspeakers. Ladies and gentlemen, as promised, we've got something special for you before the night ends. A respectful exchange between two legends. Let's hear it for Keanu Reeves and Steven Seagal. The crowd roared. Whistles, chants, applause. Backstage, Seagal stood motionless. Another knock. Sir, it's time. He took one breath, then another, then walked out the door. He didn't greet the staff, didn't glance at Maya or Dante. His eyes were forward, locked onto the long tunnel that led to the mat. The cheering grew louder with each step. Dante leaned in toward Maya. He's not walking like someone eager to share. He's walking like a man on trial. Maya murmured, "Let's just hope he doesn't turn this into an execution." They both stood and followed the procession quietly. As Seagal reached the mat, Keanu was already there. No ceremony, no spotlight, just standing in a relaxed posture beside a jiu-jitsu coach named Mateo, who had volunteered to assist. Keanu nodded respectfully as Seagal stepped onto the mat. The crowd's energy surged again, but beneath it all, something else was rising. Not adrenaline, not ego, tension. That invisible wire pulled tight between two men who had lived very different versions of strength. And for the first time that night, even the audience could sense it. This wasn't just a show anymore. It was a mirror, and one of them wasn't ready for the reflection.
The final takedown echoed across the mat as the crowd roared in appreciation. The main event had concluded, a hard-fought match between two rising stars that delivered exactly what fans came to see. One of the fighters, drenched in sweat, raised his opponent's arm in mutual respect. Cameras flashed, applause surged, and just as the lights began to dim, signaling the close of the evening, the announcer's voice returned with a sharp lift. "Don't leave yet, folks. Something remarkable is about to happen." The air changed immediately. People who had been standing to leave sat back down. Conversations died out mid-sentence. Everyone turned their eyes back to the center mat. Two icons of martial arts, sharing the same space, same moment. This is not a match. This is an exchange of philosophies. Please welcome Steven Seagal and Keanu Reeves. There were no fireworks, no loud music, just a quiet, growing tension that built as the first figure stepped out from the right tunnel. Steven Seagal, tall and broad, wearing his black gi with an embroidered dragon symbol on the sleeve, walked slowly toward the mat. His face was unreadable, though his steps held purpose. From the opposite tunnel, Keanu emerged wearing a simple navy jiu-jitsu gi with no branding, no patches, nothing flashy, just clean, simple fabric and bare feet. He moved with the ease of a man at peace, eyes soft, shoulders loose. As he stepped onto the mat, he stopped and bowed, slowly, deeply, with intention. The audience hushed further. It wasn't just tradition. It was Keanu's way of setting the tone. Humility first. Seagal stopped a few paces from him. He gave a nod. Not deep, not cold, just enough to acknowledge. But the contrast between the two greetings wasn't lost on anyone watching. Keanu turned toward the crowd and gestured for his assistant Mateo to step forward and stand to the side. Seagal made no motion for any assistant. He stood alone. The announcer's voice echoed again, more subdued now. "This is a freestyle flow, a demonstration, no points, no winner, just respect." Keanu turned back toward Seagal and gave one final look. Then both men stepped closer to the center of the mat. The tension in the arena shifted. People weren't cheering now. They weren't even clapping. They were watching, the way people watch the ocean before a storm, drawn in but unsure what would come next. Seagal raised one hand and circled, slowly, inviting Keanu to move. Keanu didn't. Not right away. He simply watched. Then he nodded, and the demonstration began. Keanu stepped forward with measured calm, hands relaxed, body loose but alert. Seagal shifted his stance, presenting a classic Aikido frame. Leading with one arm, body turned sideways, weight balanced on the balls of his feet. The two circled slowly. Every small movement was amplified by the silence of the crowd. Seagal struck first, reaching for Keanu's wrist in a fluid motion. His intention was clear: to guide Keanu into an arm control sequence, redirecting his energy. Keanu responded not with resistance, but with a subtle pivot, allowing Seagal's grip to move past him. Their hands connected briefly, then separated. No clash, just a conversation in motion. The crowd barely breathed. Seagal tried again, this time using more pressure, initiating a sweeping motion that would normally off-balance most opponents. But Keanu lowered his base slightly, rolled with the motion, and landed lightly on one knee before springing back up in a smooth reversal. His movement was quiet, efficient. He hadn't fought the force. He had gone with it, let it pass, and returned with calm presence. The first exchange ended in a mutual reset. No winner, no advantage, just a pause. Seagal's expression tightened, his jaw flexed. Then he gestured for Keanu to show something. Keanu gave a small nod and moved closer. This time, he reached out, not aggressively, but to initiate contact in the way jiu-jitsu practitioners do. Hand on the collar, other hand to the sleeve. Seagal allowed it, but his posture signaled caution. Keanu flowed into a gentle transition, not taking Seagal down, but showing how control could happen from a place of contact. A simple grip, a shift in angle, a potential sweep if needed. But he never finished the move. He gave Seagal the space to feel it, then released. The audience began to understand. This wasn't about dominance. It was about expression, listening, showing without overpowering. But Seagal, perhaps feeling the subtle shift in perception, took a deeper breath and moved faster on the next exchange. He stepped in with authority, locking Keanu's arm in a rigid grip and beginning a shoulder rotation. For a moment, it looked like Keanu would be thrown hard. But instead of resisting, Keanu dropped to the mat, tucked his chin, and rolled with the force, landing softly on his back, legs coiled beneath him. Before Seagal could follow, Keanu had already transitioned into a guard position. Calm, defensive, but ready. He didn't attack. He waited. Seagal stood still, not following him to the ground. It was a clear moment of contrast, two philosophies, fully visible now. Seagal, standing tall, preferred distance and control from the feet. Keanu, grounded, offered connection and adaptability from below. The crowd, for the first time, reacted audibly, not with applause, but a collective murmur of realization. Keanu stood up slowly, brushed off his gi, and gave Seagal a respectful bow once more. "I think that's enough for tonight," he said, his voice calm and steady. Seagal didn't speak. He simply turned to the crowd, raised a hand, and stepped back. The announcer came back on the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was not a match. That was an encounter, a moment of respect between two martial artists with different paths. Let's hear it for both legends, Steven Seagal and Keanu Reeves." This time, the applause thundered, not just because of technique, but because of humility, because of the restraint it takes not to win, but to listen. Backstage, cameras flashed. Journalists scrambled to capture the moment, but inside the arena no one had moved. They remained still, reflecting on what they had just seen. A performance? No, a story, told not in words, but in movement, in breath, in the space between conflict and understanding. And it wasn't over yet. Keanu nodded once more to the crowd before exiting quietly through the same tunnel he came from. And as he disappeared into the shadows, the tension he left behind only grew heavier, because what was supposed to be a demonstration had revealed something deeper, something neither man had fully planned, and everyone watching felt it. The moment had returned. After a brief pause and a sip of water backstage, the announcer's voice boomed through the arena once again, steady and deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, as promised, what you are about to see is not a fight. It is a flow, a respectful exchange between two masters from two very different worlds." The mat was cleared again. This time, the lights dimmed slightly around the edges, leaving a focused circle of white in the center. Keanu walked in first, calm and unhurried, his posture relaxed, breathing even. His gi was still spotless. His eyes scanned the mat once, then settled softly on the far end. Steven Seagal followed, this time with more intensity in his stride. He adjusted the sleeves of his gi twice as he walked, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. His movements held the energy of a man not yet satisfied. The referee didn't step in this time. There was no need. This was not competition, it was demonstration. They faced each other again. Keanu bowed first, a deep, full bow. Seagal's nod was shorter this time and less graceful. Then, without any verbal cue, Seagal stepped in with his first movement, a sweeping circular arm motion aimed to grasp Keanu's wrist, redirect his balance, and lead him into a center lock. The move was classic Aikido, fluid, elegant, meant to use the opponent's energy against them. Keanu didn't resist. He rotated his forearm, slipped the grip, and pivoted on the balls of his feet. No aggression, no counterstrike, just nothing to grab. Seagal stepped back and tried again, this time attempting a two-hand grab. Keanu moved at the last moment, gently breaking alignment and shifting his shoulder out of reach. The timing was subtle, almost imperceptible. Again, the move failed. Seagal's expression flickered. Keanu stayed in position, arms low, hands open. He wasn't playing defense, he was preventing conflict from ever beginning. The crowd, at first quiet, began to murmur. They weren't seeing blocks. They were witnessing something far more disarming. Prevention. A type of martial invisibility. Every attempt Seagal made was absorbed, redirected, or neutralized before it could become real. On the third approach, Seagal tried to commit more fully. He launched into a dynamic technique, one that, if landed, would result in Keanu being flipped to the mat with force. His feet shifted in a wide arc, and both hands reached out with intent. Keanu dropped his weight at the perfect instant. He didn't run or back away. He simply stepped offline and let the momentum pass by. There was no contact. Seagal spun slightly and had to recenter. Keanu didn't capitalize. He waited. Again, it was disarming. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying not to escalate. That fact, slowly dawning on the audience, changed the entire tone of the event. Whispers filled the room. He's not fighting. He's removing the fight. The murmurs grew louder. From the front rows to the bleachers above, people leaned forward, confused and captivated. No one could look away. This wasn't showmanship. It wasn't acting. And it certainly wasn't a choreographed scene. This was something else entirely. Something harder to define. Steven Seagal reset his stance, frustration creeping into his breath. His movements, once graceful and circular, started to carry a sharper edge. He stepped forward more aggressively now, initiating another Aikido blend that involved a shoulder lock, followed by a redirection into the ground. Keanu did something simple. He lowered his base and gently turned his body just enough to shift the trajectory. Seagal's wrists never even made contact. The hold was never born. Another breath wasted. Another technique dissolved in silence. Keanu still hadn't thrown a single strike. A child in the crowd whispered, "Why won't he hit back?" A father leaned in, just loud enough to be heard. "Because he doesn't need to." Seagal circled, jaw tight. The next attempt was more direct. An iriminage, a classic entering throw. He stepped into Keanu's center with force, arms extended, ready to lead him into a backward fall. This one required timing and commitment. Keanu simply pivoted his rear foot, rotated his hip, and the energy passed right by him like wind. Seagal stumbled slightly. Keanu remained still, not rigid, rooted. The crowd gasped. Some clapped quietly. It was becoming clear. Keanu wasn't beating Seagal in the traditional sense. He was showing a completely different philosophy, one that didn't require domination to prove its strength. Seagal, however, was not pleased. His breathing had quickened. His mouth was slightly open now, drawing in air through grit teeth. He reset again, then suddenly feinted left and swept with his leg. An uncharacteristic move meant to surprise. It almost worked. Almost. Keanu moved like a reed in water, bending at the knee, catching the sweep with just enough space to not trip, then stepping back into a neutral position. No attack, no retaliation, just presence. It was uncanny. No one had ever neutralized Seagal's movement like this, especially not without using offensive techniques. Even Maya, standing in the press area backstage with Dante Park beside her, felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "This isn't an exchange anymore," she whispered. "It's a philosophy class, with bodies." Dante didn't speak. His jaw had clenched, not in anger, but awe. He watched the screen with glassy eyes. "That's not defense," he finally said. Maya turned to him. He continued, "That's mercy." Back on the mat, Seagal's expression had changed entirely. No longer composed, his eyes narrowed, his mouth drawn, his posture became heavier, more like a fighter and less like a teacher. He lunged in with an aggressive grip, aiming for Keanu's collar this time. Keanu let him take it. But the second Seagal tried to convert the grip into motion, Keanu relaxed his shoulders, dropped his weight, and let the energy collapse. Seagal lost balance. Not much, but enough. Keanu could have followed through, but he didn't. Instead, he let go, bowed his head slightly, and stepped back. That's when the entire arena went silent again. No movement, no taunt, just Keanu choosing not to finish, not to prove anything. That single decision, made in front of thousands, spoke louder than any technique. Seagal straightened. His hands clenched briefly, his chest rose and fell with force. He looked at Keanu, then looked away. For the first time, it was Seagal who paused the match. Not officially, but visibly. He nodded. It was a small nod, not of victory, not of defeat, but of recognition. The hush returned. It settled like a soft veil over the entire expo hall. Phones were down, no one was cheering, no one was shouting. Every pair of eyes stayed locked on the two men at the center of the mat. Seagal's face was tense now, locked in something deeper than concentration. His pride had taken a hit, not from a strike, not from humiliation, but from something more unnerving. Keanu wasn't trying to win, and somehow that made it worse. The Aikido master squared his stance once more. This time, there was no feint, no artful entry. He moved with power and intent, reaching for a full-force takedown, a classic sumi otoshi designed to unbalance the opponent with sheer momentum. His arm swept out, his foot followed, and his body barreled into Keanu's space. But Keanu saw it, all of it, and not just the mechanics. He saw the emotion behind it, the pressure, the desperation. He didn't meet force with force. He simply slipped. A pivot of the heel, a slight roll of the shoulder. The energy passed through empty space where Keanu had just stood. Seagal lost alignment. He caught himself, but only barely, and in that exact moment Keanu reached forward, not with a punch, not with a counter, but with a single open palm lightly placed on Seagal's chest. A touch. That's all it was. A calm, deliberate touch. Not a blow, not a shove, just contact. It froze Seagal completely. His balance returned, but something else left him. Everyone in the room inhaled together. The gasp didn't come from the motion itself, but from the meaning. Keanu's touch wasn't to control. He was to show, to communicate. You came at me hard. I saw you. I could have hurt you, but I didn't. That message hit harder than any punch ever could. Seagal stepped back, not because he was forced to, but because he needed distance. His eyes dropped for a second, scanning the mat beneath him like it might explain how things had gone so far off script. The silence swelled. Keanu didn't move. He didn't push his advantage. He simply lowered his hand and bowed his head ever so slightly, as if offering respect, not triumph. That's when something cracked, not visibly, but internally. Inside Seagal, years of image, of reputation, of being the master in every room, All of it felt suddenly, quietly questioned, but not by the crowd, not even by Keanu, by the absence of domination, by the power of restraint. The people watching didn't cheer yet. They didn't need to. They were witnessing something rarely seen. Two legends on a mat, but only one of them understanding that true strength didn't need applause. From the sidelines, Dante Park sat frozen on the edge of a bench, his hands clasped between his knees, the muscles in his jaw tensed and relaxed, like he was processing something deeply personal. Maya stood beside him, her phone still down. Her eyes shimmered. "This isn't just martial arts," she whispered. Dante nodded. His character. Seagal reset his stance, but something was different. His breath was heavier now, not from exertion, but from something harder to name. The audience sensed it too. The rhythm had changed. What began as a technical exchange was becoming something deeper, almost philosophical. Keanu waited, relaxed but aware. His eyes never narrowed, never challenged. They simply watched, soft with understanding, firm with presence. He wasn't there to win. He was there to reveal. Seagal circled, slower this time. He made no move, not yet. The silence stretched. And then, with the discipline of decades behind him, Seagal moved again. This time it was smoother, more refined, a clean kotegaeshi, the signature wrist throw that made his film career legendary. His arm swept out, fingers aiming for Keanu's forearm, a fluid attempt to redirect momentum. But Keanu met the motion differently now. Instead of resisting, he flowed with it. His body turned with the force, matching speed and angle, until the throw dissolved mid-air. His footwork shifted, and instead of being thrown, he ended up standing beside Seagal. Peacefully. Again, he placed no strike. Again, he didn't counter. He just stood. It felt impossible. Seagal lowered his hands, blinking. That subtle move had been meant to end the exchange. He had used it on dozens of trained fighters. It always worked. But here, it simply faded into nothing. There was no embarrassment on Keanu's face, just calm. He stepped back, giving Seagal space, refusing to trap him in ego or defeat. A murmur rippled through the crowd, hushed but unmistakable. Something rare was happening. Two giants were sharing the same mat, yet only one was fighting, and the other was absorbing. It wasn't that Seagal lacked skill. It was that Keanu wasn't playing the same game. And in that realization, the mood in the arena transformed. Somewhere high in the bleachers, a young martial arts student whispered to his mother, "Why doesn't he hit back?" His mother, watching with folded arms, replied softly, "Because he doesn't need to." Back on the mat, Seagal exhaled slowly. The sound was audible. He took a half step back and then paused. A flicker crossed his face. Not defeat, not shame, recognition. He raised his right hand slightly, not to strike, not to grapple, but to acknowledge. A small gesture. His fingers curled loosely in front of his chest. Not quite a bow, not quite a salute. Keanu responded with the slightest nod. They weren't done, but something essential had shifted. The audience could feel it. The crowd wasn't witnessing a match anymore. They were witnessing a lesson, and Seagal, whether he admitted it or not, was becoming the student. The air grew still, not tense, but reverent. Cameras stopped clicking. Even the announcer fell silent. Seagal took one more step back and slowly lowered his arms. His shoulders relaxed. For the first time that evening, his face softened. The man who once stood as a symbol of invincibility now stood as something more human. Keanu offered a gentle smile. No triumph, no mockery, just grace. Then, with a movement so quiet it could have been missed, he extended his open hand, not to attack, but to connect. Seagal hesitated, then took it. Handshake. firm, honest. The crowd erupted, not with cheers of victory, but with applause for vulnerability, humility, and restraint. In that moment, ego met wisdom and bowed. The applause was still echoing when something in Seagal shifted. His chest rose high with breath, but not the kind that centers. It was the breath of a man unraveling. Pride bruised, image shaken, and years of self-made mythology cracked open before a stadium of witnesses. His jaw tightened. His eyes, once calm and calculating, now carried a flash of heat. Keanu stood still, hands low, calm as the surface of a lake. He wasn't baiting, he wasn't ready to strike. He was simply present. But Seagal took a step forward, and this time, it wasn't flow, it was force. His arms moved sharper, faster, but without the precision of earlier movements. Gone was the smooth redirection of Aikido. What came instead was raw momentum, a shoulder thrust, then a sharp shove meant to unbalance. Not in a technical sense, but in a desperate one. The crowd stirred. Something was different now. The respect that had filled the air minutes ago was clouding. Attention replaced it, like everyone was watching a line being walked, or maybe crossed. Keanu stepped to the side, pivoting on one foot, letting Seagal's momentum pass like wind. No counter, no retaliation. But Seagal came again, this time trying to seize Keanu's wrist, pull it across, and drive downward. It wasn't textbook. It wasn't even safe. It was the kind of grip that could lead to injury if resisted at full strength. Keanu didn't resist. Instead, he moved with it. With one clean motion, Keanu stepped inside the attack, bent his knees, shifted his weight low, and swept gently behind Seagal's lead foot. A soft hip turn, a precise redirect, and Seagal's body lost balance, not by force, but by the truth of physics. It wasn't brutal. It wasn't fast. It was poetry in motion. Seagal hit the mat. Not hard, not painful, just clean, but loud enough to echo. The entire arena froze. Keanu didn't move. He stood exactly where he had been, arms relaxed, breathing steady. Then he extended his hand. It wasn't boastful, it wasn't demanding. It was simply human. Seagal looked up at him. On the mat, on his back, the legend laid low. Not by brutality, but by technique. Not by anger, but by humility. And in front of thousands, the silence stretched. Seagal stared at Keanu's hand as if it were an accusation. His chest heaved, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. Pride battling clarity. The years he had built his name, the roles, the accolades, the claims of invincibility, all flashed through his mind in that moment. And now, the man who stood above him didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't even blink. Keanu just waited, silent, steady. The hand didn't waver. The camera lenses zoomed in. The world watching from home leaned in. This wasn't a match anymore. It had become something else. Something that laid bare who these men really were when the showmanship peeled away. Finally, Seagal sat up, but he didn't take the hand. He pushed himself to his feet. Slowly, his eyes never left Keanu's. Not in defiance, but in disbelief. As if he was still trying to calculate what had happened and why it hadn't ended in domination or humiliation. Keanu gave a small bow, not deep, just enough to say, "I see you." The crowd began to stir, then cheer, then roar. But Keanu didn't acknowledge it. He wasn't performing for them. He turned toward the edge of the mat, giving Seagal the space to exit on his own. No spotlight stolen, no finish line claimed. That more than anything struck Seagal. For years, he had seen martial arts as a battlefield, a hierarchy. You either won or you were forgotten. But Keanu hadn't come to win. He'd come to honor the mat, to honor the moment, to honor even the man who had tried to overpower him. Seagal stepped back, walking slowly off the mat, his shoulders rigid, but something visibly cracking beneath the surface. Backstage, Maya whispered into her microphone. "That wasn't a defeat," she said. "That was a revelation." Even Dante, arms crossed, no longer looked conflicted. He looked moved. "It's not about power," he said quietly. "It's about character." As the applause continued, Keanu took one last look towards Seagal. Just a glance, but it held weight. Not judgment, not pity, just understanding. A silent offering of grace. Seagal didn't return it, but he didn't reject it either. He simply kept walking, and in the hush that followed, it was clear to everyone something had shifted. Later, in the locker room, the noise of the crowd was still echoing faintly through the cement walls. Seagal sat alone, unwrapping the tape from his wrists. His movements were slow, almost mechanical. No one dared interrupt him. Not his assistant, not the event organizers, not even the press. But one envelope sat neatly on the bench beside him. Handwritten. He stared at it for a long time before finally sliding his thumb beneath the flap. Inside was a small note. No signature, just a sentence. Strength is not proven by control, but by restraint. Seagal didn't need to ask who had written it. He closed his eyes. For a man who had always been told he was the storm, it was disorienting to realize that stillness could be stronger. Meanwhile, Keanu stood outside the venue, hoodie up, quietly declining interviews. One young fan reached out timidly, asking what the moment had meant. Keanu just smiled and said, "Sometimes the best fights aren't won, they're offered." The kid didn't understand completely, but he would. Back inside, Maya finished her report. Her voice was steady, but her eyes glimmered. "Tonight, we witnessed something rare. Not a spectacle, not a rivalry, but a man refusing to escalate, choosing honor when he could have chosen dominance." Dante nodded silently beside her. He had seen enough of both in his own journey, but tonight planted something different in him. And back on the mat, now cleared and quiet, the final image lingered. A simple bow, hand offered in peace, a choice made in front of the world, not for applause, but for something greater. The locker room buzzed with leftover energy from the crowd outside. Echoes of cheers still seeped through the concrete walls, muffled but unmistakable. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed above as Seagal sat on a bench, his shoulders hunched, towel around his neck, sweat still clinging to his arms. His face was flushed, but not from exertion. His jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the floor. "He'll make me look weak," he muttered to no one in particular. The words bounced softly off the walls, picked up only by his longtime assistant Paul, who stood by the lockers, unsure if he should respond. Paul had seen Steven Seagal in countless moods over the years. Proud, aloof, boastful. But this was something else. A quiet fury, not aimed at anyone in particular, just swirling inward. Seagal slammed his fist against the metal locker beside him. It rang like a gong in the empty room. "I didn't even hit me," he said bitterly. "Did you see what he did? He didn't win. He just made me irrelevant." Paul looked at him cautiously. "You showed control. You were dignified." But Seagal shook his head. "No, he was showing me mercy, like I was some old dog too proud to quit." A few feet outside the locker room, Maya stood with her back against the hallway wall, recorder tucked subtly into her jacket. She hadn't meant to stay, but something told her this part of the story wasn't over. She wasn't looking for scandal. She was looking for truth. And the truth was never just on the mat. The door opened slowly. Keanu entered quietly, unaccompanied, still in his gi pants and a plain t-shirt. He held a water bottle in one hand, his expression open but calm. Seagal didn't look up. Come to gloat? He asked, without venom but also without warmth. No, Keanu said, stepping closer, voice low. I came to talk. Just us. Paul hesitated, looking to Seagal for permission. Seagal gave a quick nod. Paul stepped out, shutting the door gently behind him. Keanu took a seat across from Seagal but didn't speak right away. He gave the silence room to breathe. Gave the other man a chance to speak first if he wanted. But Seagal stayed quiet, his ego still raw. Then Keanu said, I didn't make you look weak, Stephen. I just didn't perform. I didn't play a part. I showed up as I am. Seagal scoffed, wiping the back of his neck with the towel. Yeah? And what am I then? A performer? A fraud? Keanu didn't answer immediately. He looked around the room, then back at Seagal. We both perform, just in different ways. But tonight, you wanted to fight like a character, and I didn't want to. Seagal's eyes narrowed. So you think I'm fake? No, Keanu said softly. I think you've forgotten what's real. The words hit like a body shot. Seagal stared at him, jaw tight. You don't know what I've given up to stay on top. You don't know the pressure. Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I do. More than you think. I've been asked to play heroes my whole life. But that's not who I am. Not always. And neither are you, Stephen. The silence that followed wasn't bitter. It was heavy with something older. Regret? Maybe grief? Seagal looked down at his hands. They were still trembling from the adrenaline. Or maybe from something deeper. I trained my whole life to dominate, to never let them see fear. My father raised me to crush weakness before it could grow, he muttered. Keanu nodded slowly. And who told you kindness was weakness? Seagal didn't reply. The question hung in the air. Maya, still in the hallway, pressed a hand to her chest. She wasn't crying, but something about the moment felt like it should be sacred. She didn't press stop on her recorder. Not yet. Back inside, Keanu rose and walked toward the bench. He didn't tower over Seagal. He didn't crowd him. He just sat beside him. Two men, no spotlight. I didn't come here to fight you, Keanu said. I came because I was asked. But I stayed because I wanted to understand. Seagal turned to him slowly. Understand what? What makes a man hold on to power so tightly he forgets what it's for? That broke something, not in a loud way. But something in Seagal's posture eased. The tension in his shoulders lowered. His grip on the towel loosened. You think I've wasted it? He asked. Keanu shook his head. I think you still have time to teach, to guide, but not from a pedestal. For a while, Seagal didn't move. Then he whispered, You bowed. Even after I refused your hand? I didn't bow for you, Keanu replied. I bowed for the art, for the discipline, for what saved both of us long before cameras and crowds. Seagal exhaled slowly. His eyes glistened, though he blinked quickly to hide it. The warrior in him didn't know how to cry in public. But the man inside, he heard Keanu. Outside the locker room, Maya lowered her phone and stepped away. She had captured enough. But something told her the world didn't need to see it all. Some moments were meant to heal, not perform. Inside, Seagal leaned back, voice softer now. I don't know how to be anything else, Keanu. You already are, Keanu said gently. You just forgot. There was no more ego left in the room. Just two aging fighters, sitting on a bench, remembering why they started. A knock at the door broke the quiet. It was Seagal's assistant. He peeked in, hesitating. Keanu stood first. I'll let you rest. As he reached the doorway, Seagal spoke up. Keanu. Keanu turned, hand on the frame. Seagal paused. Thank you for not embarrassing me, and for not letting me embarrass myself. Keanu gave a nod. "Any time." Then he stepped into the hallway, passing Maya with a faint smile. She said nothing, just looked at him with quiet respect. As the door closed behind him, the murmur of the crowd outside returned. But something inside that room had changed. Not because of dominance or defeat, but because of restraint. Because of humility. Because one man had the power to destroy and chose instead to preserve. And the other man, after decades of pretending, finally started to see the truth. Dante Park stood alone in the corridor, just outside the locker rooms. The post-fight buzz still echoed through the arena like a lingering aftershock. He could hear distant murmurs of fans still discussing what they had witnessed. Keanu's quiet control, Seagal's unraveling pride. But Dante wasn't thinking about the crowd. He was thinking about the lesson. He had grown up watching Seagal's films on a loop. The fluid movements, the no-nonsense confidence, the aura of invincibility. It had all shaped his understanding of what martial arts could be. At 10 years old, he'd copied Seagal's stance in his bedroom mirror. At 15, he'd trained in Aikido out of respect, and at 27, he had finally earned the right to be invited to a stage like this, alongside legend. But what he saw tonight unsettled him. He had watched Seagal get more aggressive with every failed move, every blocked grip. He had seen the frustration boil behind the man's eyes, and he had seen how Keanu never escalated, never tried to humiliate him, even when he clearly could. There was no showboating, no need to prove anything, just presence, precision, and grace. Dante took a breath and stepped quietly into the hallway that led to Cigarette's private prep room. A security guard gave him a look, but didn't stop him. He knocked softly. Inside, Seagal was sitting on a bench, hunched slightly, sweat-drenched towel draped around his shoulders. His assistant stood nearby, silent as ever, fiddling with his phone. Seagal looked up, his expression hard, guarded. Dante nodded with respect. "Sir, I won't take much of your time." Seagal didn't respond, just raised an eyebrow. "I just wanted to say, you were my hero growing up," Dante said, voice steady. "Your movies, your presence, it inspired me to start martial arts." Seagal shifted slightly. "You say that like it's past tense." Dante paused. "I still respect you, deeply. But tonight," he looked down for a moment, then met Seagal's eyes again. "Tonight, I realize who I want to become." Seagal stared at him, unmoving. Dante continued, "You taught me discipline. But Keanu, he showed me something I didn't expect. That real strength doesn't need to dominate. It just is." The words hung in the room, heavy but not cruel. Seagal's assistant stopped scrolling. The silence deepened. Seagal exhaled, the air slow and deliberate. His hands, which had been resting on his knees, curled slightly into fists. Not from anger, but from something else. Maybe shame. Maybe recognition. "You think I don't know that?" he muttered. Dante didn't flinch. "I think you knew it once, maybe even lived it. But somewhere along the way, I lost it." Seagal finished the sentence himself. His voice wasn't sharp. It was low, worn, and maybe for the first time in a long while, honest. Dante gave a respectful nod. "It happens. To the best of us." Seagal's eyes flickered toward the mirror on the far wall. His reflection stared back, older and heavier than the version the world still imagined. His hair darker than nature had intended, his eyes slightly sunken from years of wear, travel, ego, and the pressure of being a living myth. He stood slowly, walked over to the mirror and looked at himself. Just looked. No fixing his collar, no straightening his back, just a man confronting the image that had once ruled the world. "People used to fear me," he said quietly, "used to hang on every move. I didn't have to say much. Just walk in and the room shifted. Dante stayed silent. Let the man talk. But it wasn't real, Seagal went on. It was curated. I built a persona so strong I started believing it myself, forgot where it ended and where I began. He touched the glass gently, then looked at his own hand. The lines, the age, the reality. Keanu didn't need the myth, he said. He walked in with calm, not with noise, and somehow that was louder than anything I've ever done. Dante stepped forward, slow and respectful. What he did tonight wasn't to make you look weak. It was to remind us what humility looks like when it's lived, not preached. Seagal's jaw tightened, not in defense, but in reflection. And that's what hit the hardest. He didn't mock me. He honored me by not sinking to my level. Dante placed a hand over his chest. And you're still a legend, sir. But legends evolve, or they fade. Seagal let the words land. Then finally, with a weary breath, he sat back down. You're right, he murmured. I forgot what this was all about. Outside, Maya stood in the hallway. She hadn't recorded a thing, not this moment, not the words. Just stood there with her phone lowered, eyes glistening. She had expected drama, a storm maybe. What she witnessed instead was something quieter, more powerful. Maya slowly stepped away from the door, letting the scene settle into her memory rather than her camera roll. Some moments, she realized, weren't meant for the world. They were meant for the soul. Back in the room, Seagal remained seated, his gaze distant, but alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Not fiery, not angry, just clear. He looked up at Dante. You're going to be a good one, better than me, because you still have time to choose who you want to be. Dante bowed slightly. I already chose, sir. Tonight made it clear. Seagal nodded. A long pause stretched between them, not awkward, but full, a silence of weight, of understanding. Finally, he turned back toward the mirror once more. I used to think being feared was the same as being respected, he said. But maybe the real power is in restraint, in knowing you can crush, but choosing not to. From the doorway, Keanu appeared, quiet as ever. He had waited, letting the moment unfold without interruption. He saw Seagal's posture, not rigid now, but relaxed, not defeated, but softened. Seagal turned and met his eyes. Keanu gave a small nod. No gloating, no smirk, just acknowledgement. And in that simple gesture, something shifted. Not a rivalry ending, but a man beginning again. Seagal stood up, walked over, and extended his hand. This time, it wasn't performance. Keanu accepted it, firm but gentle. No cameras, no crowd. Just two men, once icons, now equals. Connected, not by style or fame, but by humility hard-won. And behind them, Dante watched silently. A mirror stood in the corner, still reflecting the room. But this time, what it showed was something new. The trump. Not just image, but truth. 6 months had passed since the unforgettable night of the martial arts expo. What had started as a showcase of skills had ended as a quiet reckoning. Steven Seagal, once a towering symbol of cinematic strength and stoic mastery, had been forced to confront something he hadn't faced in years, his own reflection. But unlike before, it wasn't the mirror on the gym wall that delivered the harshest truth. It was the man who stood in silence, who fought with grace, who won without ever needing to strike. And now, in a modest dojo tucked away in the quieter side of Los Angeles, something rare was unfolding. The faded white banner outside the building read, "What still works? Aikido for real-life application." Inside, the floor was clean, the mats worn, and the lighting soft, absent of any stage glare or performance glitz. A small gathering of martial arts students sat cross-legged, many in their early 20s, some older, all curious. Among them was Dante, the young fighter who had once idolized Seagal, But today, he wasn't there for the mythology. He was there for the man. Seagal stood before them in a simple black gi. No movie cameras, no entourage, no performative flair. Just a man with calloused hands and a quieter tone. He began the seminar not with technique, but with an admission. "I used to think Aikido was about control," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Controlling your opponent, controlling the outcome, controlling the room. But I forgot something. True mastery isn't about control. It's about balance and respect, and sometimes knowing when not to act." Some of the students glanced at each other, unsure if they were hearing the same man whose films used to showcase impossible takedowns and stoic, invincible strength. Seagal saw the hesitation and let it linger. Then he bowed, slowly, not as a master demanding submission, but as a human acknowledging his own flaws. He walked over to Dante and asked him to demonstrate a basic wrist grab. The moment Dante lunged, Seagal flowed. Not fast, not hard, but precise. He redirected Dante with ease, guiding him to the mat with a sweep that felt more like a dance than a fight. But then he stepped back. "And now," Seagal said, glancing toward the back of the room, "let me show you something I've been thinking about for a long time." The room shifted. Quiet footsteps echoed from the entrance. A few students turned their heads. Standing near the doorway, dressed in jeans and a simple gray hoodie, was Keanu Reeves. He didn't say a word, he just nodded once. Seagal's breath caught for half a second, but then he turned to the class. "This man taught me something no dojo ever did. He reminded me that humility is the root of every true discipline. Without it, we're not warriors. We're actors playing warriors." The students straightened. Something meaningful was unfolding, but no one dared interrupt. Keanu remained still at the back of the room, his arms folded casually, eyes calm but observant. He hadn't come for praise. He hadn't come for revenge. He came because he was curious to see whether Seagal would show up not just as a teacher, but as a man willing to evolve. Seagal turned back to the class and resumed the session, this time inviting questions. But the mood had shifted. It wasn't just a seminar now. It was a moment of reflection, dressed in martial arts robes. One student raised her hand. "Sensei, what made you change?" The room went quiet. Seagal looked down at his hands, then up at the group. "Pain," he said simply. "Not physical pain. That fades. I'm talking about the kind that doesn't leave bruises, just silence. The kind that follows you into your sleep and makes you wonder why the applause doesn't feel like peace anymore." A few students nodded quietly. Even Dante leaned forward. He continued, "When I was younger, I believed strength meant never backing down, never showing vulnerability. But I mistook arrogance for confidence. I hid behind techniques instead of growing through failures. And it took someone with quiet strength to expose that." Keanu's presence was now unmistakable. He still hadn't spoken, but the students glanced at him, understanding the unspoken link. A man who didn't raise his voice to be heard. A man who didn't need to win to feel victorious. Then something unexpected happened. Seagal gestured toward Keanu. "Would you be willing to demonstrate something with me?" Keanu hesitated for a second, then stepped forward. The mat welcomed him like an old friend. He moved with his usual grace, unhurried and precise. They stood across from each other. No cameras, no audience beyond the students. Just two men in a moment that had taken decades to arrive. Seagal initiated with a basic grab, testing Keanu's balance. Keanu responded with a seamless redirection, pivoting and guiding Seagal's movement with the kind of care that came not from needing to dominate, but from choosing not to. Seagal rolled onto the mat and stood up with a light groan, brushing off his gi. There was no tension, no bravado, just breath. He looked at the students. That is how Aikido was meant to be shared. The students applauded, not because of the move, but because of the humility. Then Seagal did something no one had ever seen him do in any of his films. He walked up to Keanu, looked him in the eye, and bowed deeply. When he rose, he extended his hand. Keanu took it. The handshake wasn't stiff or symbolic. It was genuine, firm but not forced. A silent recognition between two very different kinds of strength. One forged by decades of building walls, the other by years of tearing them down. The dojo was still. No one moved. Some didn't even breathe. And then Seagal turned back to the class and said, "Now, let's begin again." After the seminar ended, students lingered, whispering in low tones, glancing between Keanu and Seagal as if they had witnessed history. Not a battle, but a reconciliation. Dante approached quietly and gave Seagal a respectful nod before turning to Keanu, who returned the gesture with a small smile. Seagal remained near the mat, wiping sweat from his brow. For once, he wasn't in a rush to leave. He looked around the dojo, not just at the banners or the worn mats, but at the people, the eager faces, the open hearts. He realized this was the kind of audience he had longed for, not in the theaters or tabloids, but here, in silence, in honesty. Keanu moved toward the door, ready to slip out without fanfare, as always. Seagal called out softly, "Thank you, Keanu." Keanu paused, turned slightly, and replied, "Thank you for showing up." Then he walked out, leaving the scent of calm and the echo of healing behind him. Inside the dojo, Seagal stood still for a moment, breathing it all in. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. Not because he'd won anything, but because he'd finally let something go. The screen fades in to the sound of a quiet, humped, distant city noise, soft wind through an open studio window, and the rhythmic exhale of breath. The voice of Keanu Reeves begins, calm and centered, recorded during a post-interview for a martial arts magazine. "Martial arts isn't about control over others," he says. "It's about mastering yourself, your reactions, your fear, your pride. The fight is always within." His voice hangs for a moment, like a ripple across water. Then it fades into the background as the camera pans into a small gym where Dante now trains, not just himself, but others. The space is modest. No flashy banners, no sponsors' logos, just clean mats, wooden dummies, and quiet discipline. Dante is barefoot, balanced on one foot, eyes closed in a Tai Chi flow. His body moves with calm precision, each movement measured not for power but for presence. Around him, a few students mirror his motions. One stumbles. Dante gently steps beside the student and resets with him, patient and smiling. No scolding, no ego, just guidance. 6 months ago, Dante was all energy and fire, eager to prove something. Now, something deeper moves through him. Not a need to win, but a desire to be whole. He's no longer chasing a belt or approval. He's becoming the man he saw reflected in that unforgettable moment when Keanu stood firm, not with force, but with grace. Meanwhile, Maya sits in her apartment, her laptop open, fingers paused above the keys. She's written dozens of articles before, famous interviews, celebrity exposés, industry gossip, but none have lingered in her spirit like this one. The screen shows the headline, "The Fight That Wasn't About Fighting." She exhales, then begins typing again. The night Keanu Reeves and Steven Seagal stepped onto the mat together, the world expected a spectacle. Two legends, two styles, two histories. But what unfolded wasn't a clash of strength. It was a mirror held up to all of us. She pauses, then types another line. What happens when humility meets ego? When legacy meets presence? When silence speaks louder than action? Maya's fingers kept flowing, each word deliberate, each sentence crafted with the reverence of someone who had truly witnessed something transformative. She wasn't just reporting, she was recording a lesson, a moment in time that redefined her understanding of strength. The audience came to see a winner, she wrote. But what they saw instead was a man who bowed to a fallen opponent and refused to take victory. Keanu didn't win. He revealed. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the window, as if affirming her thoughts with a soft rhythm. She glanced up for a second, catching her own reflection in the darkened glass. There was something different in her, too, a quiet stillness that hadn't been there before. She had covered fight nights for years, always chasing the next explosive headline. But this story slowed her, centered her. Back in Los Angeles, another scene unfolded. Steven Seagal stood in his home office, holding a physical copy of Maya's article. The printed words weighed more than he expected. Each paragraph felt like a mirror, not condemning, but revealing. The photos showed not just the famous match, but also candid moments in the locker room, quiet expressions, and unspoken tension. But none of it was framed to humiliate. The story was balanced, honest. He read aloud one line, almost in a whisper. True power lies not in domination, but in restraint. The fighter who bows is the one who truly sees. Steven closed his eyes. That sentence struck deep. He placed the article down and walked to a small shrine he kept in the corner of his home. Old photos of his first dojo, notes from students, a pair of frayed gloves from his youth. For a long moment, he just stood there. The weight of years, of ego, of image. It all pressed in, but instead of collapsing beneath it, Steven exhaled and let it go, piece by piece. In the same moment, across the city, Keanu Reeves was walking along a quiet street. No cameras, no bodyguards, just a hoodie, jeans, and his thoughts. He paused at a mural painted on the side of a youth center. It showed a child breaking a chain with bare hands. The words above read, "Strength is not what you hold, it's what you release." He smiled, then turned and kept walking. Back at the gym in Echo Park, Dante was finishing his evening session. The punching bag swayed gently, echoing the rhythm of controlled strikes. But there was no aggression in his movements now, only purpose. His breaths were steady, his footing solid. Every motion held intention, shaped by something deeper than training. He wasn't just mimicking moves anymore. He was becoming something new, something real. His gym had grown in quiet reputation, not for producing champions, but for producing calm, discipline, balance. Parents brought in troubled teens. Veterans came to find peace. Even Maya had started showing up twice a week, notepad replaced by gloves, tapping into her own quiet strength. One afternoon, Dante had painted something above the main wall, where all students could see it as they trained. The same quote from Keanu's interview. Martial arts isn't about control over others, it's about mastering yourself. And beneath it, in small block letters, the fight that wasn't about fighting. Keanu never asked for credit. He never returned to the spotlight for praise. But his echo lived in every stance, every bowed head before training, every lesson passed from teacher to student. As the camera fades from the scene, Keanu's voice lingers softly. Strength is found in how you treat others when you have the power to crush them and choose not to. Pause. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. What does strength mean to you? Another beat. And if you believe the world needs more quiet courage, compassion, and character, subscribe now for more incredible stories. Fade out.